How about that? Wow. Wow.
So nice.
Does that always happen?
It didn't used to, but that's lovely. Thank you very much.
It's lovely. It's lovely to have you here, Bob. Bob's going to talk about two books today on optimism, which is a wonderful, wonderful book. How anybody could have gone through what you've gone through in your life and been acquainted with the detail of the facts about the planet as you have and remain optimistic. We'll all have to come to the secrets of that by the end of this session. And then there's a wonderful book called Green Nomads, which is Bob's photos of Australia's wild places, taken on a 3-month, 19,000-kilometre road trip across Australia with his partner Paul Thomas, who's here today as well. So in the 70s, these guys were greenies in beanies, and now they're green nomads. And what does a green nomad do when he comes to the Writers' Festival? He brings a slideshow.
Brings a slideshow, yes. Thank you. Well, thanks, Ellen. Thanks, everybody. I'll be quite quick with this slideshow. It's not going to keep us here till 11 p.m, I can tell you, as in the good old days. But back in 1990 at Liffey, in northern Tasmania, Little Valley, where I'd found this wonderful house for $8,000 a decade or two earlier, and had become my centre of stability through state politics, through the Franklin episode, and much more. I just got back from America, having got a $40,000 prize, environmental prize, which I didn't think belonged to me, for saving the Franklin, because thousands, if not millions of people saved the Franklin. And so I got home and found that 2 blocks of forest, either end of the valley, were about to be sold for wood chipping and logging. And I got a friend to go to the auction and put up the $40,000, and we bought the 2 blocks, but they were for $240,000. So there was a slight problem here, $200,000. To cut a long story short, out of that, under the walnut tree at Liffey, and with friends including Judy Henderson, who's now retired, to Repton up near Coffs Harbour on the north coast, from whence she came as a child. We went to school together when I was at Coffs Harbour High back in the 50s. We took the hat around and we got loans, and we managed to, over a couple of very difficult years, to at least keep the debt accounted for and then start to raise money. And finally, in 1993, bought 8 hectares of fan palm and cassowary habitat in the Daintree. So it had a mainland reach, and we started to raise money. Now, the best thing I ever did for Bush Heritage Australia, which these days has more than 1 million hectares of wildlands across Australia, and helps with Indigenous people look after another 5 million hectares, and has got a turnover of $20 million. Couldn't have imagined that back in 1990. Was to get out of their way. And to do that, I got voted into the Senate in 1996. So, and all these wonderful people at fundraising and at publicity and at environmental management came in. And the story of Bush Heritage, by the way, is coming out in October, their 25th anniversary book called Bush Heritage, Buying Australia, Buying Back Australia hectare by hectare, and that's got lots of great pictures, and I've just sent a forward along to the publishers for that book, so maybe you can keep an eye out for that. Paul and I, while I was in the Senate, he was a stoic. I'd get home and say, I'm too tired. He'd say, let's go out to dinner. I'd say, oh no. And, you know, the ironing and washing to be done, and then straight back to Parliament to public duties. We got a short walk in between Christmas and New Year each year, and that was, I'm eternally grateful to this wonderful companion I have. We got together on the eve of the 1996 election, and but time came, and when I retired from the Senate in 2012, we determined that we'd head off to look at the Bush Heritage properties on the eastern side of Australia that we'd never seen, never got time to see. Told the people at the pub in Cygnet, we're heading off, and they said, well, where's your caravan? We said, we don't have one. Well, where's your trailer? We don't have one. What? We had this second-hand tent. So you're going in a car together for 3 months. Well, the social experts at the lower pub in Cygnet said, "You'll be home in 2 weeks," on separate planes. But we didn't. Paul's a great campfire cook, and I was busy with the camera, and hence this book called Green Nomads, which is largely pictures of bush heritage properties and other bits of this wonderful country of ours. So Shani, I'll start with the slides if we can, please. Here's the book. That picture in the background on the cover is from the Grampians. We got washed out of there in Victoria. Thank you. And this picture is actually taken by Paul, but it's Ora at Liffey. And I'm on the veranda there. The ponies are here. They're wild Welsh ponies, never been ridden. And there's the walnut tree. It was blown over in a gale 2 months ago, but it's still alive and kicking. And Titicatica, the great bluff behind rising 3 Empire State Buildings high behind the house, which is one of the hardest day walks in Tasmania, and a snowfall there in September a couple of years ago. Thank you. This peak, we got to the mainland, turned right, went to the Mornington Peninsula, and just beyond it to Walkerville, if any of you know it, and so our first camping night on the mainland was there. And walking along the beach, here's this pattern in the sand, about 1 metre wide and nearly 1 metre high, and it's from a previous storm has buried the seaweed, that has rotted, and the ink, if you like, out of the seaweed, when the sand has been eroded by another tide, has made this fabulous pattern in the sand. And I took a picture of that, and when we came back an hour or so later walking up the beach, it was gone. It's one of those wonderful little unique pieces in our infinite universe, moments of something special that you see that will never be seen again, except here it is for all of us to enjoy now. Next thing. We went to Burra Gorge in South Australia, just south of the Flinders Range National Park, for our first camp in that state. And these 2 cockies were camped there first, 2 galahs, and they put up a ferocious resistance to us camping underneath. You would have heard the noise. Anyway, we ended up getting along quite well together. Next. Thank you. Now this one's, if you can take a little while to focus, it's taken in the dark. That's Paul standing to the right, and here is a perfectly round boulder this high, which I called the Moon Rock. And as we were driving out of Arkaroola, go to Arkaroola if you go to the Flinders Ranges, it's a private park on the top end, wonderful people who've owned that since after World War II. Paul said, I'm told by the next place, Bulkamata, the next bush heritage property, that there's going to be an eclipse tonight. Pull up the car. Paul set up the camp while I raced up the hill to watch for the eclipse, which didn't happen. And it didn't happen because there was a haze over Lake Frome, the widest lake in Australia, and it was obscuring the moon. But when the moon got high in the sky, here it is, and you can see the eclipse, half eclipse, as the Earth's shadow, our planet, its shadow on the moon is moving to the left. And down in the gully behind us, on the red rocks, were ancient circles where the first Australians have been watching beyond this moon rock, the moon rise behind, and the sun indeed came up in the morning in the same place for thousands of years. We've got roofs over our heads, we've got pollution in our cities. So many of us just don't see that evening sky anymore. But when you get out into Central Australia, it just takes over in the evening, and we were lucky to see that marvellous phenomenon. Thank you. Bulkamata, this great rock, just coming up out of the dry plains 150 kilometres west of Broken Hill. Had 83,000 sheep shorn on it in the pound-to-pound days of the wool boom in 1954. Now the sheep are gone. Bush Heritage has got the 58,000 hectares. The wallabies are back. The emus are thriving. The Indigenous people have access back to their property, and there's some rare species starting to thrive on the place. And just where Paul's standing up there, as we arrived, there were 2 wedge-tailed eagles, which lifted off the rock, hovered for a while, and then flew gently across to the next place. Thank you. Oh, Paul took that. We're at Naree now, at the back of Burke, a great floodplain full of bird life, bush heritage property again, and the flies were, they kept us busy. But there you go, that's again part and parcel of Australia, particularly after a particularly good wet season in northwestern New South Wales. Thank you. We've now moved on to Carnarvon Gorge and the Carnarvon property in central northern Queensland. And this plateau that we're on here is at 1,200 metres. It's the highest contiguous area in Queensland after Bartle Frere, that mountain north in North Queensland, which is the highest mountain outside Kosciuszko. Thornton, the Bush Heritage Manager, and this whole 63,000 hectares is now a private national park, effectively. I don't mean private in the sense that people are locked out. I mean private in that it's owned through the generosity of Australians, and some government money went into this as well. But the particularly great thing about this is the Bidjara people are now, they've bought the station next door. Keelan Mailman brought her book out, The Power of Bones. I think she might have been here last year. Wonderful woman, Bidjara woman, who's now the station manager for 17 years next door. And in Carnarvon are wonderful, thank you, Shani, Aboriginal Bidjara site. And you can see down the bottom right there, the European-style axes. So those parts of this frieze, if you like, are post-contact, if not with Malays, then with Europeans. Fabulous, and sculptures as well in adjacent places. And the Bidjara people are currently bidding to get back their traditional lands, and I've just sent an affidavit in support of that. Thank you. And this is called the White Stallion. I hope we get the Aboriginal name back, but Paul and Thornton are standing on this rock pillar, sandstone pillar, eroded over a huge period of time. And when I look back to get this photograph, there's a penumbra around the sun, which indicates rain within 48 hours. You might have seen one around the moon right overhead here last night at about 9 o'clock. And the next night we got washed out of our tent good and properly. We're out in nature's garb in the middle of the night trying to stop the tent from leaking unsuccessfully. Thank you. Into Carnarvon Gorge itself, which is a national park. This is the amphitheatre. Friends of ours had a wedding in there. You've got to climb in through that slit at the bottom. You can see Paul standing there, and 60-metre high cliffs, just formulated by water over a long period of time, eroding the sandstone, and across the way, the world's biggest ferns. If you go to Carnarvon, for goodness sake, walk up to the Big Bend. On the day we were there busloads of people, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people down at the presentation site, but only 9 walked up right to the Big Bend and back. Fabulous place, thank you. Carnarvon Creek, which has worn its way through, reflecting the cliffs at the Big Bend, thank you. And this is west on the Northern Territory border. This is Craven's Peak Station, and the young station hand for Bush Heritage there took us out while his wife and new baby, little Isabella, had out there in the wildlands of Australia to see the sunset on the dunes. And this is part of the Simpson Desert, which has more a greater variety of reptiles than any other desert in Australia. Safe now in the hands of Bush Heritage Australia. Thank you. And the Imperious Eagle, that's not a changed photograph. It was a light cloud on the day, and she allowed me to walk up within about 20 metres before she gently floated off to the next stunted mulga tree about 50 metres away. These creatures grow to wingspans of up to 3 metres. The Tasmanian ones are slightly bigger. I'm now measuring about 2 metres. But what a fabulous bird. And when I was a kid, I used to see them strung up on fences all over the place on the central highlands of New South Wales because it was thought they took lambs. We now know they don't. Hundreds and hundreds shot for because people wanted to blame something, and this poor creature copped the blame. But there they are, one of the world's 7 biggest raptors, and part of what we are as Australians. Thank you. Sunset at the Leichhardt Falls, on the Gulf and Carpentaria. We saw that coming, so I had plenty of time to get that photograph. Thank you. And a rock wallaby at the Granite Gorge on west of Cairns. How did that creature get there? Well, she hopped from a boulder over here on the left, out of picture, and landed on that little shelf, just as if, you know, an amazing thing. How these animals have adapted for their own safety to be able to manoeuvre cliffs and rocks like that. Thank you. Thank you. Can you see them all? This is at Yorker Station in northwest of Townsville. Bush Heritage Station, there's 3 there. This is Mum on the left, Dad on the right, and little one in the middle. But just the wonders of camouflage. And they're safe, you see. I had trouble to get that picture because they would take no notice. I had to shout at them to get them to put their heads up so I could get the photograph. Thank you. And the top of the Burdekin River, it's although we're 70 kilometres from the coast, this swings 800 kilometres and comes out between Ayr and Home Hill in sugarcane land in central Queensland. But we were going cross country and found this fabulous little piece of the upper Burdekin. If you look carefully back there in the background, you can see what looks like a watermelon floating on the water. That's Paul swimming. That's his head out. I thought it might, well, that's not crocodile country, but it was good to have Paul take the first swim in the river. We found billabongs, places to camp. I thought we'd be crowded in busy camping area. We had night after night, out under the stars, these wonderful, beautiful campsites by the road. Thank you. And that's a black-headed python getting across the road as we were coming back down towards Innisfail. Paul grabbed it by the tail, but it was stronger than he was and kept going. These, of course, are not venomous, although he didn't know that, but there's part of lots of wildlife that we saw along the way. Thank you. And the Wallerman Falls. Well, I ask you, who knows that these are Australia's greatest drop? This is 360 metres from top to bottom, falling into the canyon, west of Innisfail. The greatest, there's a Canadian, there were only 4 of us when we got there. It warns you about driving slowly because of the cassowaries. As you go up, there's sealed road all the way. So if you're in north central Queensland, put it on the list. And it was this time of year, and leaning over the rail there, and up came the Canadian tourist and said, she must have been to a lot of other little falls around Australia. You know, we are a dry continent. Now that's a waterfall. And it was thundering into the gorge, and, you know, I just entranced. The pool at the bottom is 30 metres deep from the plunging water gouging into the gorge, and you can go down there if you want to. Thank you. A couple of stone curlers on Magnetic Island, just off Townsville. And if you go to a restaurant there, these are the waiters at table, and they're very camouflaged, and they do a little walk and stop stock still, and they're in the backyard of the place we were staying at. Actually in trouble because they used to range from Melbourne right up past here. They've gone for most of their range in Victoria and New South Wales, but they've got the stronghold, and a woman of Danish extraction, an Australian woman, we met her at the stalls, has committed her life to protecting these wonderful Australian birds on Magnetic Island. Beautiful place. Go there if you can. Thank you. Not so beautiful. I yelled at Paul as we're getting over the granite boulders to the other side. We had a swim on the other side of Magnetic Island. Somebody told us after, like, well, that place is full of salties. Just as well we didn't know about that. But he put his foot on this rock as he was going, behind him he had a bear He had sandals and bare feet. That's a death adder. And you can see its beautiful camouflage. Bottom right here is its diamond-shaped head and a little black thing in that first coil, which is the end of its tail, and it's brought it up between the coil and it flickers it. And along comes a mouse or a bird thinking, oh, there's a nice grub, and grabs the tail, you see, and ends up being dinner for the death adder. No wonder the indigenous people are smart enough to clean all the leaves out of their campsites before settling down for the evening. Wonderfully adapted creature and part of Australia's reptile repertoire. Thank you. Butterflies at the Reedy Creek Reserve, Bush Heritage Reserve, a little further down the beautiful Queensland coast. Thank you. This fellow, Aboriginal artist at Nimbin Rocks, which is a male Aboriginal site, and I didn't want to intervene on his painting, but stopped and got the picture, and he said he's going to put that painting, you can see what a wonderful interpretation of the rocks it was, in the Nimbin Museum and Cafe. Well, a fortnight later, I read in the paper the museum and cafe was burnt to the ground. So I'm still on the trail of this good fellow to say, at least I have a picture of your beautiful painting if it was lost in that fire. Thank you. And this is the Glasshouse Mountains from Mullaney, off the deck of a hotel. We had a birthday party, my twin sister and I, up there, ticked over 70 while this was on. What a beautiful part of Australia, though, and Brisbane's just to the right down there and the coast out to the back. Captain Cook gave the Glasshouse appellations. They've got very beautiful Aboriginal names for each of these mountains. Thank you. We crossed to the Great Ocean Road. Some women there have a fabulous block of land right on the coast, and they want to make sure that when they die, it'll be passed on for future generations of Australians to enjoy. So we crossed over there. We'd had a letter from them to help talk about that and introduce them to bush heritage. And these are amongst the creatures in the bush on that beautiful part of the Victorian coastline. Thank you. Back home to Randalls Bay. This is where Paul and I live in southern Tasmania, and you look around that corner straight out to Antarctica. And the next one, thank you. And that's Paul's farmhouse. Thank you all.
That's terrific. Paul was saying you're planning another trip next year.
We're going to do the western side and go to bush heritage places like Hamelin, which is part of Shark Bay, where the stromatolites, big sponges that look a bit like coral, are in the water, 3 billion years old in lineage. That is, they were part of the first plant life that converted carbon dioxide into oxygen, preceding us, making it possible for us to be alive on the planet. What a great thing that that's now protected.
And you were saying that, it wasn't that busy at these campsites where you were going.
Well, there's no one there.
So which brings me to my point. Can we come?
Well, of course you can. And part of the book is for two reasons. To encourage people to get out and enjoy this beautiful country of ours, because nature is the great restorative to the spirit and the soul. It's much better than the many of the medications that we can take. I knew that as a doctor way back. But the second thing is we recognise that, Ellen, there's a lot of people can't, for all sorts of reasons, don't want to be camped out in amongst cowpats and whatever. And so the book is a way of sharing what we had with lots of other Australians.
It's a terrific book, and I should say before we go any further, a very big welcome to our national audience. We're streaming this event live, and so there are folks listening and watching in Albury, Bathurst, Adelaide, Cairns. It's the first time the audience has been watching in Cairns, so g'day in Cairns, Darwin, Frankston, Port Macquarie, Taree, Toowoomba, Townsville and Wollongong. So welcome to all those people who are out there listening and watching. I was interested to see you were talking about the fellow, the Indigenous artist who may have lost his painting in in a fire in Nimbin. When you read through the book Optimism, people make an impact on you, don't they? 30 years later, you can say, well, I was travelling along and I met an old man called John.
Well, I mean, John would make an impact on all of us for the good. I'd been into the Tarkine wilderness looking for Tasmanian tigers. They aren't there, but...
Worth checking.
Worth checking in 1973. And when I got back to the bus station to catch the bus back to Launceston at Ulverston, the bus was late, and here was this old gentleman with white hair and his trousers tucked into his socks and a bicycle at the back of the shed. And we got talking. I was telling him I'd just bought Liffey, and he was very happy for this young fella who had been out in the Tarkine. And then he told me his story. And as a young fellow, his father had carved a farm out of a bit of the Tarkine wilderness in northwest Tasmania. His grandfather had been brought out as a convict in the hulk of a ship. His father was a brute, I think not through his own fault, but he was a very brutal man. Anyway, at 15, young John went skipping through the forest, 10 minutes away from home, and to a secret rendezvous with the girl from next door. And they went skinny dipping in the river. Problem, father arrived with a lump of 4x2 and took to him and left the son dead, effectively, having battered him unmercifully. He told me that there was water and blood flowing out of his ear. Well, he had a cracked skull. And his mother found him and carted her broken boy home to the hut. And after a few days, he regained consciousness, keeping the brute away. And he got out the window and fled into the bush. And he lived there for years, first on raw animals that he could catch, and later he stole matches and bits of bread. And after some years, he got up the courage to come out and work in the West Coast mines. But he never forgot that girl. And he told me he'd just been riding up on the mainland for the first time his push bike. He'd stopped in a shed at Cooma and he got saddle sores. But by the time he got to Ipswich in Queensland, he was homesick and he wanted to go back to Tasmania. And as the story unfolded, it was clear he wanted to go back and be near her. He'd never seen her from the age of 15. But he tracked every move, and he had a little piece of newspaper in his pocket which had a picture of her with her children in the local newspaper. And he'd seen her once at a country fair. She hadn't seen him. And he knew now that she was a grandmother. He knew where she was. He told me her name. And he told me how happy he was that she had had a good life and had got on so well in life. He didn't have a trace of enmity in him. He just had lived in the glow of that brief love for her all through his life. And he passed that on to me back there 40 years ago, and I've got that little story in the book because it's such a glowing tribute to the potential for love to overcome shocking circumstances and what you would think would lead to a further bout of darkness. He broke the train of horror, turned it into something beautiful, and passed it on to me to pass on to you.
You went to London after Tasmania. You were working as a doctor and you were working in a hospital there when they brought Jimi Hendrix in and he died. What had you concluded, other than the medical reason for his death, about why he had died as such a young man?
Well, I thought I had nothing in common with him. He'd been brought up on a stretcher to the St Mary Abbott's Hospital emergency section where I was working, and it was clear he'd been dead for some hours. He'd choked on vomit and he'd had a big night of I don't know what and red wine. But he was dead, and there was a young blonde woman trotting along behind the bear who was obviously his girlfriend, and she was as helpless as we were. But having read it, and I just missed going to the Isle of Wight Music Festival, which was his last appearance because I'd taken another engagement at a hospital. I've always been sorry I didn't go to that. However, his poetry, that he'd fought racism as a youngster. he'd overcome it. He'd become this sensational breakthrough guitarist and musician for the world. And as he said, I want you all to come with me on a rocket ride when I play into wherever we're going. And he also said, I'm not a citizen of America, I'm a citizen of Earth. I want to do away with all boundaries. He was a human being for a human community, a poet who died at that remarkable, it seems, age of 27. So an inspiring character, and if you can get hold of, there is a book out, I mentioned it in there, of just his words. To see this wonderful human being is to be inspired. Mm.
And I guess all of these are stories. We're coming to the lovely story of Peggy McKenzie, of what you can overcome. Because this is a moment at your life when you're writing about these characters where you haven't yet made the shift from a depressed young man, struggling young man, into somebody who can truly be, despite whatever life throws at him, an optimist.
Yeah, and I think I was lucky because I had a wonderful parents and a good family, as did Jimi Hendrix. But in my case, I was gay and Presbyterian, which wasn't the best mix in the 1950s. And I couldn't tell anybody about that, and so yes, I did get depressed, and I was on medical antidepressants for a long while, and then hence I flew to London to sort of break the circuit, and it was a great thing to do. But it is very important. So I have a great empathy when I see people struggling to try and help them out. Now, by the way, Ellen, it's just lovely when people come up these days and say, you know, we're partners, they're two young women or two young men, and we thank you for being there through all. I didn't become a gay activist as such, but I did come out in 1976, and boy, did I cop it for saying that I was homosexual in 1976. But I realise now there's lots of kids, not least kids in the bush, who can't talk with people about this because they're still hearing the epithets, anti-gay sentiments. They still know that gay equality in marriage is banned in this country because our politicians are so far behind public sentiment on it. And it's just such a good feeling to have got through. I walked down City Road in Sydney when I was at the university at the age of 18 and said, if I can ever get out of this, this imprisonment of self-abnegation and feeling so lousy about oneself, if I ever get out of this, I owe it to other people to help them too. And luckily I did get out of it. And,
but what you went through, Bob, in order to get out of it, and it's an important story, I think, to tell because it maybe accounts for your resilience, which I find otherwise unaccountable. You know, how you can withstand what you've withstood, it seems unaccountable. And you're saying maybe you were forged by this. What sorts of therapies were thrown at a young man such as yourself to try and rid him of his homosexuality?
Well, besides the antidepressants, yes, I did get up in Macquarie Street. Secretly went up there and sought out a psychiatrist, and who came to no good later on, I might add. But anyway, he gave me injections of testosterone, and you know, it didn't even put more hair on my chest. Complete failure, but it took my pocket money, so I couldn't go home out to Windsor of a weekend, which is a big. I had to explain to my parents I was studying. And then later on, aversion therapy, because I'd read in the medical textbooks that if you got electric shocks, when you were shown a picture of a naked male and you were given a nice glass of water, when you saw pictures of a naked female, suddenly your brain would turn over.
And where did they administer these electric shocks?
Well, that was out of Prince Henry Hospital, but let me hurry here to say I really am grateful to the doctors who applied. I went asking for it because in those days society was so punitive. I look at the front page of the Sydney paper today about the gay hate murders that were, we think, occurring in Sydney. So it was so punitive, and it was 20 years in jail, you know, for being sexually engaged. So they were trying, and none of them was judged. I I couldn't tell my secret to anybody else, but I ran into these, I was a medical student, ran into these fellow doctors who weren't judgmental. They were just trying. It didn't work, but you know, it sounds a bit gross now, but it wasn't them or me that was creating that circumstance. It was how society thought at the time. And it's so wonderful now that instead of getting abused up the street, or the window wound down by cars driving by saying, you effing so-and-so, people are very nice about it. And the feedback's good. You know, wonderful things happen. Seems to take a long time, but our society has progressed wonderfully since those repressive mid-century and before, because people were hung, as they are being now in Iran, here in Australia, for engaging in homosexual activities.
And do you think the public are ahead of the political classes?
Way ahead, yep. I put my faith in the people all the time, yeah, thank you. And it's inevitable, because the public, you know, and all the opinion polls show that, but the feedback everywhere, and right across the political spectrum. Oh, come on, you know, why aren't we having a referendum with this election if they must have a referendum? Why haven't we legislated? But it's coming. It's as sure as God made little apples.
You describe a sort of a year of reformation in 1976, and leading up to that you had a lovely fellow, a psychologist that you encountered in London, who maybe gave you the words of acceptance that you needed to hear, and a lovely mental picture of him leaning back in his chair and looking at you thinking, there's nothing terribly much wrong with you, son. What did he say to you?
Well, he was a great chap. I'd love to know who he was. I'd love to get back to just give him a big hug. But anyway, he just leant back in his chair and said, get over it, you know. Be who you are. Go out and have fun. You know, meet other guys. It was illegal, but we by then had the Wolfenden report, which said it should be decriminalised. And so I did start to meet, it always had to be covert, but I did start to meet other young fellas and found people with similar stories. And it took a long while, but 5-6 years after that, I went on ABC TV in Tasmania. Well, that was pretty daunting stuff, but I look back on it now, very glad that I did. I think the only thing more daunting than that, Ellen, was that time I stood up and told George W. Bush to respect the laws of the world when I was in Parliament in Canberra. I don't know why that came into mind, but...
I was there that day. So what happens in 1976? You're rafting down the Franklin, and when does the notion of putting your shoulder to the wheel to protect the wilderness areas of Australia, when does that occur to you? And why is it such a vocation for a person who has just come out, is comfortable in his own skin, and is a doctor, has done lots of
Well,
work?
I hadn't come out then, and one of the things that happened that year was I ran into Paul Smith. He was a bearded forester in Launceston. He was coming down the steps of the Northern Regional Library, and he says, are you Bob Brown? And I said, yeah. He said, I hear you're a bit of an adventurer. I'm trying to get people to float down the Franklin River with me in these new Taiwan-made single-person rafts, and I can't get any of them to. He didn't say that none of them would be silly enough to take on such a venture. Looking at me, he thought this might be one. And anyway, in return for a walk in the mountains with friends, I rafted down the river with him, and Ellen, those 2 weeks were astonishing. There were sea eagles in the canyons and platypuses coming up and surfacing, and waterfalls down the sides of the ravines, and 4,000-year-old Huon pine trees and leatherwood blossoms, and these great thundering rapids, and you could hear the possums whistling in the night and the owls calling, and no human beings. And when I got to the end of that, when we came around the bend onto the Gordon River, here were jackhammers, helicopters, explosions going on in adits in the gorge wall, where they were trying to find a place to anchor a dam which would flood what we'd been down. And I'm a doctor in Launceston and in general practice, having come from Sydney Uni, realising that more than half my patients are there for stress. They got skin rashes, stomach ulcers, high blood pressure, all sorts of things going on. And here we are destroying the greatest storehouse for relaxation and inspiration and adventure in the wild planet from which we all come, and which created us physically and mentally. And you know, to shorthand it, which is why we put pictures of flowers on the wall, not pictures of chainsaws, saws and jackhammers. And that's why we like our kids and ourselves to watch Attenborough, rather than some shocking, violent or ghoulish picture. Anyway, it struck me that it would be much better to save the Franklin for all future generations to enjoy, and for everyone who went down there, you know, 1,000 get joy out of the pictures and the film of it. It would be better to keep it than to build another dam for more electricity to produce more tranquilizers. So I got out of direct medicine and into campaigning for the Franklin, but I was still into preventative medicine, and I've been there ever since.
Right. That's a lovely answer. I love your turn of phrase in this book, Optimism. The penalty for ordinary intelligence is reflection and conscience and the urge to make things better. My denial mechanism failed. And so, you know, so there you are, full of good intentions. But, you know, it was a bit shaky learning the art of politics, I have to say, and you've been very open about this. Because, Bob, you're not a natural fit for politics. You sort of haven't got the turn of mind. For instance, when you were on your political P-plates, I want you to confess to the audience that you accidentally banned lesbianism in Tasmania, which was quite the faux pas, really.
Well, if that wasn't my annus horribilis, to quote Her Majesty, it was certainly my few days of it. Yes, I was keen to get rid of the anti-gay laws, which applied to males only, because, you know, apocryphally Queen Victoria wouldn't believe that women could be engaged in sexual activity, but when they banned male homosexuality, so it never applied directly to females, although the discrimination's been there. And there was a 20-year penalty in Tasmania, and up came the change of the criminal code to make it gender neutral. The laws had always been written, if he does this, he will be fined that. If he does something, it's as if women didn't exist. And at least we're in the age where that male talk was being neutralised. So if a person does this, they will be fined that.
You can see how things are going to go badly wrong in a minute, don't you?
Section 122 came up, and I was expecting the Labor Party Shadow Attorney General to move to get rid of Section 122, which said that male persons who engage in unnatural acts will be subject to 20 years in jail. And when we got there, nothing. And I'm there as a lone Green in the Parliament, and so I impulsively moved, thinking this is going to pass, I'm going to miss this bus, they haven't done anything. I impulsively moved to make that gender neutral as well. And they, without a debate, they all said yes. So suddenly it was illegal for males and females to be engaged. And I'd banned lesbian activity. Well, the phone started ringing. And the Examiner in Launceston, Brown bans lesbians. Oh dear. And so the government said they're not going to alter it in the upper house. They'll stick with it. So I rang the most liberal-minded man, because there was one woman in the upper house, but she was an exception to the rule in Tasmania, and I said to him, oh please, look, I've made a huge mistake here. I never intended, people don't want lesbian activity to be criminalised. I've made a mistake. And he said, well, it sounds good to me. And I was, you know, I was truly, it was a horrible time. I was beside myself. But as so often happens in such extenuating circumstances, something falls from the sky. And on this occasion, it was the Premier of Queensland, Joe Jelke-Peterson. Because he was asked if he was going to ban lesbian activity in Queensland as well. And he said, goodness, no. We're not going to do that, but he was certainly going to keep the prohibition on male homosexuality. And the journalist who'd written it up in the Examiner had also pointed out that Queen Victoria was aghast at such a thing, and so it hadn't been decriminalised. So I took the clipping of the Joe Jockey Peterson's refusal to go along with this, and in fact his criticism of it, with the clipping that Queen Victoria didn't approve, and I sent a little anonymous note to all the Legislative Council members so that they then had to make a choice between Joe Jockey Peterson, Queen Victoria, or this homosexual Green in the lower house, Bob Brown. And they unanimously voted to knock out the amendment. So I was saved by Joe.
Isn't that a great story?
I should say the good lesbian folk of Tasmania were saved by, by Joe.
By Joe Jockey.
Yeah.
Coming back to the difficult times you've gone through, you write about 1986 in the Tasmanian Parliament, 9 years before Port Arthur, is that right? 1987?
Yes.
Saying, you know, we've got to have a look at these semi-automatic weapons and we need to ban them, and that didn't go ahead. And we all saw what happened. You tell the story years later of being in the Senate, and there's a parliamentary inquiry into the Greens' decision to accept a $1.6 million donation from Graham Wood, a businessman, and the suggestion was that you know, you would take in the money to do his bidding so that he could purchase a Tasmanian.
Yes.
And just briefly, I mean, how serious was that allegation? I mean, what was the consequence if you were found to have done that, taken money for?
Oh, well, you faced a potential jail sentence.
Yeah, and what did you spend to defend yourself?
Well, $70,000 to get in QC. Nobody had ever been sent to the Privileges Committee in the Senate under the Privileges Act of, I think, 1998 or 1988, whatever. But here was this consortium of Liberal national senators and our good Senator Erica Betts from Tasmania, who's never classed me as a friend, saying that we had taken this money to help
to do his bidding.
To do his bidding, which was to buy a wood chip mill to
He
close
bought
it down.
you, was the allegation.
Yes. But the problem was, of course, that donation had come to us long before the wood chip mill was up for market. There was any talk about it. I mean, it was a complete concoction. And that's how the Privileges Committee, which is made up of people right across the spectrum, found it. But in the meantime, of course, the Australian was giving this great coverage, that august, unbiased, well, you know, so culpable, the Murdoch media, on so many fronts in this country where we should have freedom of information, but we don't. Well, we should have equal information. However, I won't get on to that. But it was a case of being put in the dock on spurious charges. And, you know, Ellen, going back to an earlier question you asked, but how do you put up with all this?
That's where I'm getting to.
Well, when in the 50s, as a youngster, I saw a Russian author, was in Britain, and he let go on the Stalinist terror. And he said, you know, when I get back to Russia, I will be brought before a show trial and I will be put out. And he went back to Russia and was brought before a show trial and executed. I have never, ever forgotten that sheer courage, way beyond anything I've ever... But, you know, and I dedicate the book to my good friend Ben Oquist, but also to Rosario Godoy, Guatemalan activist. She went to, when the death squads were killing people for simply seeking social justice, and she went to the funeral of the local baker and said, Hector, the baker, you did not die in vain, she said over his grave. And on the following Thursday they found her brother and her infant dead in a ditch with the infant child's fingernails removed. And I think, oh, Rosario, you make everything I've done so easy. And in fact, you know, it must make us all think, when are we going to get out of our couches? When are we going to step off the footpath to work for a better planet? We're in the richest country ever on the face of the planet. That's Australia, 2016. But it's almost as if we have taken a tranquiliser or two too many. There's so many good things this country could be doing and isn't. And we're coming up to a vote on July the 2nd, and all I can say is vote for your grandchildren and for a better world. Don't just vote for them because they're there.
You're fighting for the Tarkine again.
Yes.
I thought that was done and dusted.
No, well, John Howard, bless him, in that stoush with Mark Latham in 2004 over forests, I took Mark out to the forest and seemed to count against him, but he stood for protecting them. John Howard then matched that in the run to the election and said that he'd give Tasmania $250 million to transform. Latham had said $800 million. Strangely enough, the CFMEU, with red flags flying, supported John Howard. We got $500 million less. John Howard swept back into power, but he protected the rainforest of the Tarkine, all off. The old dictum that when you win an environmental battle, you win to fight again. If you lose forever is in play here. And so the Tarkine is threatened with logging, not least for Tar An, the Malaysian multinational that's been paid to come into Tasmania and set up. Mining, 95% covered by mineral exploration licenses, and off-road vehicles ripping through Tasmanian heritage. Maybe we could have a look at the Tarkine. Thank you, Shani, and a little clip. I've set up this little environmental foundation. It's the Bob Brown Foundation, but it's not a superannuation fund. It's an action-oriented environment foundation. And we know we need everybody in Australia to know about the Tarkine, as happened with the Franklin, if we're going to save it. Over to Greg Hunt and Malcolm Turnbull and their Labor counterparts when it comes to protecting the Tarkine. Here's a little snapshot of this brilliant wild area, unprotected and vulnerable in northwest Tasmania.
We're just about out of time, Bob. There was a question on the screen from a gentleman in Cairns who said, how do you get people to engage with these issues? How do you get beyond indifference? And maybe I could, indifference and hostility. Thank you to Bryn in Cairns for that question. And, you know, people rallied for the Franklin cause after they thought it was done. They said, no, it's not done because it hasn't gone to the final arbiter, which is the people. I wonder to what extent people these days think that they have that agency in the world, or whether they sit back and whether it's a road through Sydney or whether it's the Tarka and they go, you can't win.
Yeah, how about those fig trees? Oh dear. Look, it really is up to us with the Tarkine, with the issue that's dear to your heart. Ring your local member of parliament and say, are you going to protect it in the next period? And if you're not, I won't vote for you. We are in a democracy, and we need to use the democratic process. I'm not in favour of anarchy, and I think that it is democracy or guns, and we can't afford the option. But we're asleep at the wheel. We should bring our candidates right to them, say, if you're not going to protect the Tarkine and you won't cross the floor over it, I won't vote for you. Very, very important, whether or whatever issue it may be.
And are you optimistic that that can affect, that first of all people will do it in an age of Twitter and all the other agencies that they've got to press those buttons? Optimistic that people will do it?
Twitter's no option for picking up the phone or buttonholing or
really?
sending a handwritten card or letter which goes into the inbox which the MP reads. It's so
and
easy
you're optimistic about the impact that might have to change hearts?
Yeah,
and
I
change
am.
the course of events?
What I don't know, Ellen, is whether we're pre or post-catastrophic. And the story with the guns, where introduced legislation to ban rapid-fire rifles in Tasmania those years before the Port Arthur massacre. Well, within 3 months of the Port Arthur massacre, Christine Milne had passed that legislation on to John Howard, and it was legislated nationally. Do we really have to wait until catastrophe? We've got our intelligence. We're good-hearted people who want to think further down the line, but it does involve us being active. And for those of us who just don't have the hours in the day, we certainly have the ability to write a cheque for social justice organisation or the democracy group or the environmental group. And we've all got the opportunity to contact those members of parliament. The lobbying in Canberra by the corporate interests which tend to run the world is extraordinary, and it shuts people out, and I think it's a very great worry. But it only works that way because we're a bit anaesthetised, and it's such a good thing to get involved. You know, don't expect massive changes, but just to be putting one's pennyworth into charting a world for the future of humanity where our children will thank us, looking back, for the better world recreated, rather than be gnashing their teeth because we just let things go. Oh, it's great to be alive, Ellen. It's great to be in the wealthiest country in the world, and it's great to have the opportunity to really think about it and be active for the future. So I'm a bird out of the cage, and I'm having a great time in doing just that. Thank you very much.
Please thank Bob Brown. Wonderful. Optimistic.
Optimistic is the word.
All right, there we are.